back, relax, and maybe get yourself a snack. Me and you gonna have a little chat about books. Hi guys! So I am here today to review two little books which I picked up whilst I was in Worldcon in Finland. These are both translated from Chinese by various different translators, and I'm going to just tell you a little bit about my thoughts on them. I don't think you can really pick these up very easily because they were kind of just selling them at a stand at Worldcon. So I don't think you can buy them easily. I'll have a look and see if I can find links. I'll put them below. The first one is this one, a collection of Tang Fei's SF, and each of the stories in this collection is written by Tang Fei, but they are all translated by different translators, and I believe Tang Fei actually paid for this collection to be put together herself, so she commissioned it. She got all the stories, obviously, that she'd already had translated in different magazines and things like that, and she put them all into this, and this is a collection of I think 5 of the stories. Cool Girl, The Person Who Saw Cetus, Path to Freedom, A Universal Elegy, and Broken Star. Now I do think some of these stories you can read for free online, so I'll put a link to any that I managed to find down below because some of them have been published in magazines that do allow you to read them online for free. Otherwise, I don't know if you can buy this collection anywhere. I'm going to briefly tell you about this collection. I think of the collection, it took me a little bit to get into because the problem with this translation in particular is that the grammar is really, really bad. The stories are fine, the translation is fine, but the grammar has not translated well for some reason. I think maybe when they were setting it, it all went a bit wrong, and because obviously the author's Chinese, she doesn't necessarily know what she's looking for with English grammar. So it's a bit weird, like speech marks will be the wrong way or whatever. But with that said, that's my only quibble because the stories were definitely interesting and some more than others. The first one is called Cool Girl, and it follows a girl who is kind of like a hooker, I suppose. You could like go to her and pay her for experiences. It's not necessarily that she gives you sexual experiences. What she does is she actually gives dreams and experiences of like a dreamscape for individual people. You have to be incredibly rich to kind of get with her, but the rumour is when you do, you never want to go anywhere else because the experience is just so incredible. So I like the story, I like the concept. I think the translation on this one didn't work as well for me. I gave it like a 3 stars. The second story in here is The Person Who Saw Cetus, and it follows a young girl whose father claims that he has seen this incredible other planet, and he sort of does a lot of performance art about it and everything he's found there, and he's quite well respected until a critic tarnishes his name, and then he starts going rather crazy and kind of trying to prove himself and do more and more outrageously and uproariously mad performances, and it all gets a bit weird, to be honest. I definitely enjoyed it. It's more my cup of tea because it is so weird, and I don't think it would appeal to everyone, but I think the nature of the story was kind of a bit crazy, which I just perfectly liked. It was something that I definitely connected with more than the first story, which was a bit more realistic with magical elements. This was kind of completely SF throughout. I enjoyed it a lot. I gave it a 4 stars. The next story in here was called The Path to Freedom, and I really, really liked this one. It was a kind of fresh idea on an old concept, I think, because it talked about aliens, it talked about a disease wiping people out and sort of evolution and adaptation and trying to live in a very hostile, negative environment. I don't want to say an awful lot more about it, but it follows a society of people who are in hiding after this kind of apocalypse thing happens, and they're living together in one room and they live in there all their lives, and it's a very strange, surreal kind of story. It worked incredibly well for me because I could really imagine it, and I feel like Tang Fei's writing for it was working very well, or at least the translation came across very well. I definitely could feel like I was in the story, I was enjoying it, and I liked that one a lot, so I gave that a 4.5 actually. It kind of reminded me a little bit in a way of The Girl with All the Gifts. The next story was A Universal Elegy, and this one is told in letter form, largely from a sister to her brother, and she's gone on this adventure to kind of live with this guy that she met. She seems to have very bad luck with guys, and the one that she's chosen for the moment is from a different species. It's obviously in a time where space travel and moving around the solar system is quite normal, so she goes with this guy to his homeland, and things go pretty wrong quite quickly, and she's writing these letters to her brother and no one's really responding. It's definitely a creepy story. I think this one was one of the creepier in the collection. It was a bit ethereal, a bit weird, because the species she's living with is totally different from humanity, and I definitely liked it. I gave it a 4 stars. And then finally we have Broken Star, which I think was probably my favourite of all of the ones in this collection. It follows a young girl who's a fairly normal schoolgirl, except every night she sees this pale woman come to her and talk to her and tell her about her future and her prophecy and the things she has to do. She's not entirely certain who this woman is, and it takes a bit of time for her to try and figure out the reason for this woman to visit her, and she doesn't really know exactly what the situation is at all. She's very confused by it, but she kind of figures it out as the story goes on. And it definitely has a sort of alien twist to it, a more science fiction fantasy twist to it that worked incredibly well. And I just found it a really, really fun story because I didn't necessarily see the twist coming. It had a bit of a gothic undertone to me as well. It definitely reminded me a little bit of like Edgar Allan Poe's stories, which I wasn't expecting at all. So I really liked that one, and I ended up giving that one in particular a 4.5 as well. So overall, this collection actually ended up being like a solid 4-star collection for me, and I would definitely recommend reading some of these stories. I think the only one that didn't hugely appeal was the first, but I'm glad I carried on because the rest were definitely worth reading. And like I say, if I can find any of them online for free, I'll put them down below so that you guys can go and check them out. Moving on to the second little collection that I have. This one is called The Khazar Key and Teartide, and The Khazar Key is a short story by Zhu Yihi. I am probably saying that terribly wrong. The second story is Teartide by Wu Fu Gang, and it's published by Duban Read. And this is literally just 2 really interesting science fiction novellas bound up into one book. I don't know if you can buy this. If you can, I'll link it. But it was so good, like way better than I imagined it being, and I really, really enjoyed reading both of these stories because they were just really, really excellent. I believe both of them actually were award-winning because this publisher do like a short story competition every few months, and both of the stories in here I believe were winners or at least semi-finalists of that competition, which I guess is why they were really good. But yeah, I didn't know that when I picked it up, so I'm definitely happy I did pick it up. The first one, The Khazar Key, follows a man who is living in a world where this new technology has started to take over called the Khazar Key, and a lot of people have been downloading it, and it's sort of started to creep into everyone's subconscious. Imagine, for example, when the iPhone came out, it's kind of the same craze as that. Like everyone started to get one, everyone, you know, nearly everyone in the world has got one or knows about it at the very least nowadays. So it's kind of similar to that. It's like this technology that takes over and everyone wants it and has it. But in this situation, the Khazar Key is not necessarily a good thing for everyone. Although it helps a lot of people and it does improve a lot of people's lives, it doesn't improve everyone's. And certain people just get really poorly affected by the messages that the key gives them and different ideas that the key puts across to them. So we follow this man whose wife ends up dead because of the key, and he is trying to tell people that he doesn't want them to use it. He believes it's bad, but he's living in a world where he's talking to brick walls essentially. People don't want to hear it. Most of them have lovely, wonderful lives because of it, but he believes there is something sinister going on with it, and he really wants to try and stop people from using it and getting sucked in to the ploys of this marketing. And I really enjoyed this. I feel like the writing style was great. I think the author was doing a really good job of making you connect to the character, even though he's like a middle-aged man who I would never really normally connect with whilst reading. I definitely felt like it was written really beautifully, and I felt like the story was really important to the character, and it just worked. It really flowed. It felt like a very easy read, but a very interesting one too. I personally really like the sort of new technology taking over trope in science fiction. It's something that I do like reading about, so it worked really well for me. And I would certainly say if I can find it, I'll put a link, but otherwise, if you ever get a chance to read anything else by this author, maybe give it a go. Moving on to Teartide then, a very similar idea actually, but executed in a different way. Teartide is a new technology that comes into the world, much like the Khazar Key, But this is an advertising technology, and it synthesizes deep thought and sort of Google Analytics to track people and to find out their buying habits. It's trying to infiltrate their mindsets and be able to do targeted advertising so that people will buy very weird products they may not normally buy because the advertising is so good, it will make them buy it anyway. And it really plays on people who have depression, people who are maybe handicapped in some way or not a functioning member of society, or people who just have their own issues. It really plays on issues that people have. It pushes them to the limit, some of them. And we follow a young woman who already writes for an app. She writes a depression column, and she talks about her life and how she deals day to day with sort of depression and anxiety. And there's a lot of followers who are already following her before this new technology of Teartide gets introduced. But when it does, the suicide rate and the amount of suicide notes and the horrors that she experiences because people have downloaded Teartide and advertising has started to take over and ruin their lives and make them go bankrupt and make them feel like they're being attacked, it just increases. The suicide rates go up massively, and when she tries to tell her friends and the people who actually can change things, it all goes very, very wrong, and no one will listen, and she ends up taking on a large burden of people, like millions of people, who are just rooting for her to save them from this thing. They can't do anything about the advertising that is taking over everywhere, so they just come to her column, they read, they leave enormous amounts of messages, and she's very overwhelmed as a character. It's a really good concept. It worked really well, and again, I think the writing was really, really strong, and the story just came across very, very well and translated the ideas of scary new technologies, again, really, really well. I loved both of these stories. I actually gave both of them a 4.5, so the whole collection got a 4.5 from me, and I will certainly be on the lookout for more work by either of these authors because it was just great, and I would love to see more of their work being translated from both Tang Fei and these two authors. It's just, I wish we had more Chinese translated SFF because so far, to be honest, everything I've read has been really good, and I would love to see more of it coming over into English so that we can read it here, because unfortunately, much to my detriment, I don't know Chinese, so hopefully more of it will get translated to English. I'd love to hear in the comments below if you have read any other translated Chinese science fiction and fantasy. Do let me know. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye guys!
Thank you for watching my video today. Go pick up a book, then come back and chat with me again.